Silver burned before it even touched her skin. Anastasia Blackwood kept her jaw locked anyway, because flinching gave people like her uncle joy, and Cain Ironhold had been feeding on hers for years. The Blood Treaty stones rose out of the border ground like broken teeth, old granite dark with centuries of rain and blood. Torches ringed the clearing. Wolves from both packs stood in hard ranks under a moon swollen red as a wound. Blackwood on the west side, Thornwood on the east, all of them watching as if they'd come for sport. She stood barefoot in frozen mud, wrists bound in engraved silver cuffs connected by chain to a collar at her throat. Her dress, if the torn white shift deserved the name, clung damp to her ribs. Someone had cut her hair jagged at the shoulder to make her look less like a daughter of the line and more like a criminal. "Raise her head," Cain said. Two Blackwood guards yanked the chain, metal bit deep. Anastasia's chin snapped up. There he was. Cain in full regent leathers, black fur mantle over his shoulders, the Blackwood crest gleaming at his throat. Her mother's brother. The man who had taught her to throw a knife at 7, then taken the knife away when her father died and told her she'd never need one again. His smile was all teeth. "Witnesses of Blackwood and Thornwood," he called, voice carrying across the courtyard. "We renew the blood treaty and end 3 years of useless raiding." A murmur rolled through the gathered wolves. Useless. As if farms hadn't burned. As if boys barely old enough to shift hadn't come back with silver in their lungs. As if Cain hadn't spent 3 years screaming for vengeance at every council fire. He lifted a packet of parchment bound with seer wax. "Our seers have confirmed the source of recent blights and moon madness. The affliction was not Thornwood's steel, but corruption within our own line." His eyes landed on Anastasia like a blade finding soft flesh. "Anastasia Blackwood carries a curse in her blood." The words hit harder than the cold. A few wolves gasped. Others looked relieved. There, a reason, a shape to put fear into. She saw old women she had brought herbs to last winter step away from her as if she were plague. Saw young warriors she'd trained beside bare their teeth. Liar, she thought, wolf snarling against her bones. He forged this. He forged all of it. Cain snapped his fingers. One of his aides stepped forward with a satchel and dumped its contents at the treaty stone. Shriveled wheat heads black with rot, a dead hare with foam at the mouth, and a braided doll made of wolf hair and thorns. "Found outside fields she blessed," the aide announced. Anastasia barked a laugh that tasted like blood. "Blessed? You barred me from the fields a year ago." Cain moved so fast she barely saw it. His backhand cracked across her mouth. She hit mud, chain jerking, silver tearing skin. "You speak when spoken to," he said softly, crouching so only she could hear. His breath smelled of clove and old deceit. "And be grateful I found a use for you." He stood and addressed the crowd again. "By old law, to prevent spread, we surrender the cursed vessel as living tribute. Thornwood may confine, purge, or execute as their king sees fit. Living tribute. Not prisoner. Not envoy. Property." Rage rose bright and useless. "I am Blackwood by blood right," she shouted, spitting red into the dirt. "You cannot sell what you don't own." Cain turned, calm as winter, and held up a second parchment. "Revocation signed by acting regent and council quorum. She is stripped of claim." Anastasia stared at the signatures. 5 names. 3 belonged to wolves dead for 6 months. Forged? It hit her then with nauseating clarity, each piece sliding into place. The raids that always somehow missed Cain's grain stores, the seer who vanished after challenging his reports, the sudden proof appearing whenever council questioned him. He had lit both sides of the border on fire, then offered himself as the only bucket of water. And now he was throwing her in as kindling. Across the stones, Thornwood ranks parted. Alpha King Alistair Thornwood stepped into the torchlight like night given shape. Broad-shouldered, dark coat over battle leathers, a crown of blackened rowan worked into his braid. Old Power rode his scent, frost pine and iron, the cold, clean edge before a storm. Wolves around him dropped their gaze without being told. Anastasia had heard stories. He had held Thornwood through 2 famines and 1 rebellion. He had outlived 3 rival kings. He had never taken a mate. His eyes found her and did not leave. Cain spread his arms in polished diplomacy. Alpha King, by treaty right, we deliver the cursed one to your judgment. Alistair approached until the treaty stone stood between them. Bring her forward. The guards dragged her by the chain. Her knees scraped rock. The silver cuffs were hot now, too hot, heat building beneath etched runes she hadn't noticed before. Tiny marks worked into the metal, older than current script. Bloodline sigils. Her pulse stuttered. No, no, no. Alistair reached for her wrist to inspect the brand burned there from childhood oathing. The instant his fingers closed over her skin, something snapped through her chest, sharp, primal, impossible. Frost pine crashed into her senses, and beneath the blood and torch smoke her own scent seemed to surge back. Midnight rain dragged toward him by a force older than thought. Alistair's body jolted. He caught himself against the treaty stone with a hard, controlled half-stagger that might have passed for balance lost on slick rock. Then the cuffs flashed white. Agony detonated up her arms, through shoulder and spine, ancient magic waking like a buried beast. Anastasia screamed, the sound torn raw. The runes on the silver blazed crimson, and for one awful heartbeat she felt a command not her own slam through her bones. Die beyond your border. Someone in her bloodline had bound it. Not exile, execution by geography. She collapsed against the stone, shaking, smoke rising from where silver kissed flesh. The crowd recoiled. Cain didn't. He watched her burn with serene satisfaction. That was the breaking point. Not the slap. Not the chains. Not even being traded like livestock. It was seeing, plain as moonlight, that Cain had never intended for her to survive the night. If Thornwood killed her, he got peace and an enemy scapegoat. If the bloodbinding killed her first, he got martyrdom theater and no witness left to contradict him. Either way, she died. He ruled. Not yet, she thought, vision tunneling, wolf clawing up with feral fury. Not on your script. A shout went up from Blackwood's side, someone yelling that the curse was spreading. Panic moved through the outer rings, wolves shifting weight, hands going to weapons. In the confusion, Cain leaned down, lips barely moving. Run if you like, he murmured. The spell ends the same. Then he straightened and barked, loud enough for all. Secure her! Don't let it touch anyone. Touch it. She was done being an it. Anastasia twisted, ignoring the skin peeling from her wrists, and drove her shoulder into the guard nearest her knees. He went down cursing. She grabbed the slack of her own chain, whipped it into the second guard's throat, and yanked. He choked, staggered. She ran. Silver bit. Mud sucked at her feet. Shouts exploded behind her. Stop her! Don't let the cursed bitch cross. Cross. Good. Let them say it. She hurdled a fallen torch, sparks stinging her calves, and hit the treaty line where old boundary stones hummed under the earth. Pain lanced through her cuffs as if the magic itself tried to drag her backward. She snarled, more wolf than woman for a breath, and threw her weight forward. The world bucked. Then she was over. Into thornwood soil, downhill into dark pines heavy with snowmelt and resin. Branches whipped her face. Her chain clattered against roots. Behind her came pursuit. Blackwood boots, at least 4. Thornwood sentries angling to intercept. Night air tore into her lungs, sharp with pine and distant river. Her blood dripped a bright trail over needles. She could hear everything, the thunder of paws as some shifted, the click of crossbow mechanisms, Kane's voice faint and furious from the clearing. Bring her back alive. Alive, for now. A bolt hissed past her ear and buried in a tree. Silver-tipped. Not meant to capture. She veered left, down toward the ravine where mist collected low. If she could make water, she could lose scent. If she could lose scent, she could think. If she could think, maybe she could live long enough to expose him. Her foot hit slick stone. She went down hard, ribs slamming ground, chain tangling under her. The collar jerked tight enough to blacken the edges of her vision. She clawed at it, coughing. Footsteps closed in. Hold! A male voice roared from ahead, not Blackwood. Anastasia looked up through hair and blood. Thornwood wolves materialized between trees in gray war cloaks, crescent sigils stitched at their shoulders. Their formation was disciplined, blades low but ready. At their center stood a woman with a scar down one cheek and command in every line of her body. By order of the crown, the woman said, gaze flicking from Anastasia's chains to the Blackwood hunters crashing through brush behind her. You are in Thornwood territory. Drop weapons. Hand her over, one of Kane's men snarled. She's Blackwood property under treaty transfer. The scarred commander bared her teeth. You don't own breathing things on our ground. A growl rolled through the trees, deep, resonant, instantly obeyed by every Thornwood wolf present. They parted before the sound. Alistair stepped out of the dark. No torchlight now, only moon silver on his face, on the hard line of his mouth. He looked from Anastasia kneeling in mud to the raw burns around her wrists and throat. Something lethal went very still in his expression. Blackwood's lead hunter tried bravado. Alpha King, the regent demands. Alistair didn't look at him. Kneel, he said. The command cracked like winter ice. Thornwood wolves dropped to one knee as one. Even the Blackwood hunters hesitated, then bent under sheer dominance, faces tight with humiliation. Only Anastasia remained half-collapsed, chain in her fists, shaking too hard to stand. Alistair came to her slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal he refused to startle. He crouched, close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his dark eyes. Anastasia Blackwood, he said, voice low. May I see your wrist? May I? No one had asked her permission in years. Suspicion and desperate exhaustion warred inside her. Then she gave a single, ragged nod. His hand closed around her burned skin. The same current that had struck at the treaty stone slammed through her again. Cleaner now, no flare of curse light to drown it. Frost pine and midnight rain surged and locked together in the cold ravine air, and every wolf present jerked as the scent shift hit full force. Alistair inhaled sharply and physically staggered, smaller than before but undeniable, one hand bracing on his knee, pupils blown wide. Anastasia's wolf surged to the surface in aching recognition, a howl rising in her chest. She bit down before it escaped. Mate. Something ancient whispered through her blood, impossible and undeniable. Alistair's gaze slammed back to hers, glacial control snapping over raw impact. His jaw flexed once. Untie her, he said, voice roughened to a near growl, and in the silence that followed, the entire border seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. Thornwood wolves stayed kneeling, heads bowed. The Blackwood hunters looked like men forced to swallow glass. Anastasia could hear her own pulse in her ears, too fast, too loud, racing against the strange, impossible hum still sparking under her skin where Alistair held her wrist. The bond did not feel soft. It felt like being split open and recognized anyway. Warmth surged up her arm in bright, molten lines, meeting the cold ache of silver burns and turning pain into something sharper, stranger. Electricity licking along nerve and bone, settling low in her belly like a live coal. Her breath caught. Alistair's scent hit her again, frost pine and iron and stormlight, and her wolf shoved hard against her ribs, not with fear this time, but hunger, need, belonging so violent it made her dizzy. Alistair's eyes flashed gold. It was quick, a predator's tell he should have hidden, and then gone under iron control. But she saw it, saw his throat work on a hard swallow, saw the sharp intake of breath he couldn't quite suppress when her scent wrapped around his like rain on winter bark. Mate. The word rattled through her skull like a thrown chain. No, it couldn't be. Not here in the mud with blood on her tongue, not with Cain's lies still smoking behind her, not with a king whose name was spoken like a battle prayer in every den from here to the northern cliffs. And yet the pull between them was undeniable. It was physical, magnetic, old as moontide. If he leaned in an inch, her body wanted to answer. If he let go, some part of her would lunge. She hated that. She hated that relief rose with the terror. A wild, aching relief that she was no longer the only one hearing this impossible call in her blood. Behind them, one of Cain's hunters found his voice. "This is treaty property." Alistair turned his head slightly, and the hunter shut his mouth so fast his teeth clicked. "Commander Sarah," Alistair said without taking his eyes from Anastasia, "remove Blackwood from my territory." "Yes, my king." Sarah rose and signaled. Thornwood soldiers flowed forward, efficient and silent, disarming the hunters in 3 swift movements. A knife hit the moss. A crossbow thudded down beside it. A Blackwood man cursed and got a thornwood blade at his throat for his trouble. Anastasia barely tracked it. Her focus kept snapping back to the hand at her wrist. His thumb brushed once over the edge of a burn. Gentle, almost reverent, as if apologizing to flesh he had not wounded. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Silver poisoning tends to do that," she said, voice raw. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like respect for a bite that still had teeth. "Can you stand?" Could she? Her legs felt like water. Pride made the answer for her. Yes. She pushed up and nearly pitched forward. Alistair caught her elbow before she hit the ground again, then immediately loosened his grip, giving her room to pull away if she chose. She noticed that. She noticed everything now, how he angled his body between her and everyone else without crowding her, how he kept his voice low, how he asked before touching. It made no sense. Kings took. They did not ask. A Blackwood hunter spat into the leaves. "Enjoy your cursed whore, Thornwood." She moved before she thought, wolf snarling, chain lifting like a whip. Alistair moved faster. The sound that ripped out of him was only half human. Bones shifted in a visible ripple under skin. Fangs punched down. His irises flared molten gold. In one impossible blink, he had the hunter by the throat against a pine trunk, boots off the ground, claws pricked just enough to bead blood. "Choose your last word carefully," Alistair said, voice layered with a wolf's growl so deep it vibrated in Anastasia's teeth. The hunter choked, eyes bulging. Mercy." Alistair held him one heartbeat longer, then dropped him in the mud. "Carry this message to your regent," he said. "She is under my protection. Any Blackwood who crosses my border armed will be treated as invader." He looked toward the treaty clearing, miles away in darkness and politics and treachery. "And tell Cain Ironhold that if he has bound death into his kin's blood, I will unmake him for it." The hunter scrambled and ran. Silence rushed back in. Alistair exhaled once, slow, and the partial shift retreated, fangs shortening, claws blunting, gold cooling from his eyes. He turned to Anastasia as if no one else existed. "Anastasia," he said quieter, "I need to remove these cuffs. The runes are still active." Her stomach nodded. "With what? More silver?" "With my hands," he said. "Or with a key, if you have one." She laughed once, bitter. You think Cain gave me one? Something like fury flashed across his face. Cold, precise fury. Not explosive, but far more dangerous. Then we do this carefully. He extended his palm. Your choice. You can walk beside me, or you can have a litter brought. No one will touch you without consent. Choice again. The bond throbbed like a second heartbeat between them, urging trust her mind refused to grant. But the woods were full of thornwood steel, and she was bleeding into their soil. She could run, maybe, but not far. She set her hand in his. The contact hit like lightning and sunlight and hunger all at once. Both of them sucked in breath. For a suspended second they just stared at each other, locked eye to eye while the ravine blurred at the edges. His gaze storm-dark and blazing, hers wide and furious and afraid. In that held moment she felt him feel it too. The pull, the ache, the terrifying rightness threaded through all the wrongness. Then Alistair blinked, control slamming back into place like a gate. Take us home, he ordered. Thornwood Keep rose from the mountain like it had grown there, black stone walls veined with old roots, watchfires burning blue along the battlements, carved wolf-head gargoyles guarding every gate. Anastasia expected a dungeon. Instead, Alistair took her through the main doors. Servants and sentries froze at the sight of her chains. Whispers chased them down the corridor. That's her. The cursed Blackwood. Why is she? Alistair did not raise his voice. Anyone repeating that word in my hall will answer to me. Whispers died. He brought her to a chamber in the eastern wing, large enough for a noble guest, with a fire already lit, thick quilts, a copper basin steaming with hot water. Iron lantern brackets lined the walls. Iron window bars crossed the narrow arched glass. The moment she crossed the threshold, the silver at her wrists flared white-hot again. She dropped to one knee with a strangled gasp. Alistair swore and caught her before her head struck the stone. Iron, she hissed. It. Out! He snapped to the room at large. All of you. The attendants fled. Only Alistair remained, easing her down against the bed frame. He drew a key from his belt, old bronze etched with royal sigils, and fit it into the cuff lock. It stuck. He tried again, jaw tight. Who made these? He muttered. Cain Smith. He used blood runes. Of course he did. The lock clicked. One cuff fell open. Relief tore a sound out of her she didn't mean to make. He caught the second wrist, pausing just short of touch. May I? She nodded, teeth clenched. The second cuff opened, then the collar. When it came free, she doubled over, clutching her throat, dragging air into lungs that finally felt like hers. Alistair set the silver pieces on the floor as if they were venomous snakes. He rose, crossed to the wall, and yanked an iron fire poker from its stand. What are you doing? She rasped, breaking every iron bar in this room. She stared at him. My king, said the captain at the door, daring to peek back in. The eastern wing was forged with. Then summon the dungeon smith and every carpenter you can wake, Alistair said. Now, replace iron with rowanwood before dawn. My king, that is an order. The captain vanished. Anastasia watched him return, watched this feared king kneel in front of her with a damp cloth and gently wipe blood and soot from her wrists. He could have caged her and called it prudence. He could have collared her for safety. He could have used treaty law and fear and 1,000 years of precedent. He didn't. Her suspicion sharpened because of it. Kindness from powerful men had always come with hooks. Why? She asked. Alistair met her gaze. Because pain is not proof of loyalty. Because you were harmed under my authority the moment you crossed my border. Because... He stopped, choosing words like weapons. Because I will not begin this by repeating what was done to you. This. The bond pulsed at the word, answering. A knock sounded hours later after healers had come and gone and the bars lay piled in the courtyard below. Moonlight striped the room through temporary wooden slats. Anastasia had refused sleep, pacing like a trapped thing until exhaustion finally dragged her into a shallow doze near the hearth. She woke choking. Chains. Silver. Kane's voice in her ear. Die beyond your border. She came up snarling, claws half-shifted, sweeping for a throat. Anastasia. Not Kane. Deeper. Rough with concern. She spun. Alistair stood just inside the doorway, unarmed except for the ceremonial dagger at his hip, eyes on her hands, posture loose and non-threatening. Don't, she warned, voice shredded. He unbuckled the dagger, walked 2 careful steps forward, and set it on the floor between them. Then he backed out of reach and dropped to one knee. I am not here to command you, he said softly. I'm here because you cried out. Her wolf paced under her skin, frantic. Fight, flee, bite first. Alistair lowered his head slightly, not submission, but respect to the predator in her. No one cages what is mine to protect. The words landed like heat against old ice. He held out his hands, palms up. If you want me gone, say it. If you want the door guarded and no one entering, I'll do it. If you want me to stay until the shaking stops, I stay. Choice. Again. Anastasia stared at his hands, then at the dagger lying hilt first toward her. Slowly, because she hated needing anything, she put her frozen fingers into his. His palms were warm, calloused, steady. He didn't pull her close, didn't claim, just sat with her in the dark while her breathing stuttered back toward normal. Outside, she heard hammering through the night as workers removed the last iron fixtures and carried in fresh-cut rowan. By dawn, her chamber smelled like woodsap and smoke instead of metal and fear. Something in her armor cracked. The Moon Court convened the next night in Thornwood's lower hall, a circular chamber of stone and shadow where elders sat in carved seats, and judgment echoed too well. Anastasia stood at the center beside Alistair's throne dais, wearing borrowed gray leathers and a plain cloak. Her wrists were bandaged. Burn scars still ringed her throat like old accusations. Every eye in the hall tracked her, as if waiting for rot to bloom under her feet. Elder Marrow, all bone and bitterness, struck his staff on stone. We cannot ignore risk, my king. Blackwood delivered her as cursed tribute. Until testing is complete, she should be confined below. Murmurs of agreement. Another elder, Brant, bared yellowed teeth. A silver collar will contain any contagion. Temporary, of course. Anastasia laughed, short and sharp. Temporary like a grave. Alistair's voice was calm. No collar. Brant stepped down from the benches anyway, silver ring glinting in his hand. With respect, sire, sentiment has no place in plague law. He lunged. Anastasia twisted on instinct, but Alistair was already moving. Half-shift slammed through him in a blur, spine arching, claws lengthening, fangs dropping. He hit Brant mid-step and drove him into the stone dais so hard dust rained from the carvings. The silver collar clattered across the floor. Gasps erupted. 2 guards started forward, then froze at the look on their king's face. Alistair pinned Brant by the throat, claws braced against stone on either side of the elder's neck. Hear me clearly, he said, each word edged in growl. Any hand raised against Anastasia is a hand raised against the crown. Brant wheezed, eyes rolling. My king. Treason does not become less treason because it wears elders' braids. The hall went dead silent. Alistair released him with a shove. Brant slid down the dais coughing, too humiliated to meet anyone's eyes. Alistair straightened, shift receding by brutal degrees, and turned to Anastasia. For the first time, she saw fury and restraint coexist in the same body like twin blades. Then he did something no one in the room expected. He stepped to his throne, sat, and struck the armrest once. Bring a second chair. No one moved. His gaze iced over. Now. A page sprinted. Moments later, a carved chair, smaller than the throne but crafted of the same black oak, was placed at Alistair's right hand on the dais. The message was unmistakable. Shock rippled through the court like a thrown stone in still water. Anastasia felt it hit her too. She did not move. Alistair looked at her, not commanding, inviting. Take your seat. Every survival instinct screamed not to step higher than elders born and bred to tear her down. But if she refused, they would call it guilt, fear, proof. She climbed the dais and sat. From here she could see the whole court, the resentment, the curiosity, the outright hostility, and beneath all of it, uncertainty. No one knew what to do with a king who had just redrawn law in real time. Alistair stood. You demanded to test the accusation, he said to the chamber. So hear from the accused. Anastasia Blackwood will speak in her own defense. She speaks under crown protection. Interruptions will be removed. He turned slightly toward her, voice dropping for her alone. You owe them nothing except what you choose to give. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Anastasia rose on unsteady legs and faced the elders who had already sentenced her in their minds. The old terror surged, of being called liar, hysteric, cursed, burden. She felt the bond at her side, a steady pressure like a hand at her back, not pushing, simply present. My uncle says I wither crops, she began, voice carrying farther than she expected. Then ask why his own grain stores never failed while border farms starved. Ask why seer records appeared with dead wolves' signatures. Ask why the silver used on me carried bloodline runes that ordered my death on your soil. The room stirred. Elder Marrow frowned. Bloodline runes? She held up her bandaged wrists. Check the cuffs, if they haven't been melted to hide evidence. Sarah, standing guard near the pillar, spoke for the first time. They are secured in the armory by the king's order. Anastasia kept going, words gaining heat as years of silence finally cracked. I am not asking your trust. I am asking for investigation, real seers, neutral witnesses. Audit every message from Blackwood in the last 3 winters. Follow the raids. Follow the blight. Follow who profits. Brant glared up from the edge of the dais, rubbing his throat. Convenient accusations from a desperate woman. She met his gaze without flinching. Desperate, yes. Liar, no. Alistair's voice cut cleanly through the hall. Then we proceed by proof. Seer tribunal at first light. Open records. Joint witness from each war claw. Grudging nods. Sharp whispers. But no one objected loudly this time. Court adjourned in scattered clusters of dissent and calculation. Elders filed out, some avoiding Anastasia's eyes, others looking at her as if she were suddenly a puzzle rather than a plague. When the chamber finally thinned, Anastasia remained seated, fingers gripping carved armrests to hide their tremor. Alistair stayed beside her, quiet. After a long moment, she said, You just made enemies. I had those already. For me. For what is right, he said. Then, after a beat, and for you. She looked at him, really looked, at the man who could have made her a prisoner and instead gave her a voice in front of wolves who wanted her collared. The bond between them still frightened her. Kane's shadow still lived under her skin. Trust was not a door she could fling open because a king bared fangs on her behalf. But it was no longer bolted shut. Thank you, she said, the words rough with disuse. Alistair inclined his head, as formal as any treaty. One step at a time, Anastasia. For the first time since the Border Stones, she believed there might be a path forward that did not end in a grave. One step at a time, she repeated, almost to herself. A step echoed behind them, then another. Sarah crossed the emptied court hall at a near run, braid half loosened, one hand braced on the pommel at her hip. My king. Alistair was on his feet before she finished the title. What? We took a courier at the North Switchback, Blackwood cloak, no insignia, carrying sealed orders and 3 carved totems wrapped in grain sacking. Her scar stood white against her skin. The totems are blight work. Anastasia's spine went cold. Where is the courier? Alistair asked. In the lower cells. Bit through his own tongue before questioning. Sarah swallowed, anger cutting each word sharp. He died laughing. She held out a leather dispatch tube stained dark at the cap where wax had broken. The seal was iron-hulled red. Alistair took it, then paused and looked at Anastasia. With me. The war room smelled of lamp oil, damp maps, and storm. Sarah spread the captured pages over a table scarred by generations of knives. Most were coded supply lines. One was a route sketch of Thornwood grain roads, marked with circles where villages traded winter stores. Every circle had a glyph beside it, a thorn crossed by 3 claw marks, Kane's private command mark. Anastasia's nails bit her palms. He's mapping famine. Sarah set down the totems one by one. Each was a thumb-length spindle of blackened wood wrapped in wolf hair and thorn vine thread, fixed with tiny iron nails at both ends. She did not touch bare skin to them. Alistair leaned in, nostrils flaring. Blood in the binding. Human? Sarah asked. Wolf. Male. Kinline linked. His voice went flat. Blackwood. Another sheet sat apart from the others, folded twice and sealed with Kane's signet. Alistair cracked it and read. His jaw hardened. Out loud, Anastasia said. He met her eyes and obeyed. To Varric of the Ashfang Rovers. Payment upon completion. Winter moot before first bell. Crown falls, border forts open, Thornwood fractures. Blame the woman. Her death follows naturally. K.I. Silence slammed into the room. Rogues. Not just border raiders, but hired killers. Kane wasn't containing panic. He was engineering collapse. Sarah cursed under her breath. He's contracting Ashfang? Those bastards ate a mountain clan alive 2 winters back. Anastasia stared at the letter until the ink blurred. Her uncle's hand was unmistakable, long slant on the K, heavy pressure on downstrokes. The same script he'd used when he taught her to write council petitions at 12. He had planned Alistair's assassination like a trade shipment. He never meant me to live, she said quietly. I knew it. But this... Her voice thinned with rage. He wants me blamed for your death. Alistair folded the letter once, precise, controlled. Then we make sure I don't die. Sarah looked between them. My king, if this reaches court before we lock it down, panic will ignite. It reaches no one yet, Alistair said. Double guard on granaries and all eastern gates. Pull trusted scouts only. If even one elder's man tries to access sealed evidence without my order, break his hand. Sarah grinned, feral and brief. Gladly. When she left, the room seemed too small for the fury in it. Anastasia put both hands on the map table to keep from shaking. Varric will hit where it hurts and vanish. Grain, bridges, healer stores. He'll make the curse look real before your seers can clear me. He won't vanish, Alistair said. Not if he wants payment. And Kane always pays in blood. Alistair stepped closer, close enough that frost pine and midnight rain tangled again in the air, sharp and inevitable. Then we hunt both ends of the chain. She looked up at him, pulse hammering. You still trust me, even now. He did not hesitate. Yes. It should have been impossible. It landed anyway. Dawn came mean and gray. By first light, 3 reports arrived almost together. Mold explosion in a riverside grain shed, 2 shepherds bitten by half-mad wolves near South Hollow, and a caravan of barley turning black in sealed sacks before reaching market. Fear moved faster than riders. By mid-morning, every corridor in Thornwood Keep hummed with one word spoken behind sleeves: curse. Anastasia felt it like grit under skin. At the seer chamber, neutral witnesses from both war claws stood in a tense ring while Elder Tamsin, a thin woman with milk-white eyes and riverstone voice, examined the silver cuffs under moonwater and salt. The old seer touched a rune with bone tweezers and hissed, "Bloodline execution lattice, triggered by territorial threshold. Whoever set this used ancestral authority." Marrow lifted his chin from across the circle. Can she have cast it on herself for sympathy? Tamsin barked a laugh. Could you carve your own spine while running? No. Next, stupidity? Anastasia would have smiled if her stomach weren't knotted. Alistair stood at her shoulder, not touching, presence steady as granite. Every few breaths their scents brushed. Every brush sent that maddening pull through her, want and warning braided tight. A junior steward slipped through the chamber door, pale-faced. "My king, urgent." A letter was found in the rookery chute, addressed to Regent Ironhold. Signed by Lady Anastasia. Head snapped toward her. Marrow's mouth curled. How convenient. The steward passed the parchment with shaking hands. Alistair read first, then gave it to Anastasia. The script mimicked her hand well enough to sting. He suspects little. Court divided. Strike at Winter Stores, and he will blame elders, not Blackwood. I will open the inner gate on moot night. Her forged signature sat at the bottom. Rage flashed white. That is not my hand on the Y-strokes, and I don't use clove resin in sealing wax. Marrow stepped forward, triumphant. So she admits correspondence. She admits your forger is lazy, Alistair said. But the damage was done. Wolves in the chamber shifted, wary and hungry for certainty. Fear wanted a face. She wore one nicely. Tamsin set down the cuff and fixed Marrow with a dead-eyed stare. If you'd spent half this energy on truth, we'd be done already. Before Marrow could spit back, Sarah burst in again, breath hard. North Granary Watch is dead, not killed. Emptied. Blood drained into the soil around planted totems. The room went silent. Show me, Alistair said. He turned, and Anastasia moved with him without being asked. Marrow called after them. She should be confined. Alistair didn't break stride. Then pray. Confinement stops famine. Outside, horses were already being saddled, clouds stacked over the pines like bruises. As Alistair swung into his saddle, he held a hand down toward her. Anastasia stared at it one beat too long, then took it and mounted behind him. Her arms circled his waist for balance, and the mate bond snapped bright, hot, impossible. He stiffened, then eased, one gloved hand briefly covering hers where it rested against him. No words. Too many witnesses. But his thumb stroked once over her knuckles, hidden by his cloak. The ride to North Granary was all wind and dread. They arrived to find rows of grain sacks split open, contents liquefied into black sludge that smoked in the cold. Thornwood sentries lay where they had stood, skin gray, mouths open in silent snarls. In the center, nailed to a post with silver spikes, hung a straw doll braided with long dark hair. Her hair color. Someone had made sure the message was clear. Sarah spat into the dirt. They want villagers to see this. Anastasia dismounted on shaking legs and crouched by one of the totems. Beneath the thorn wrapping she found a smear of wax, clove-scented, like the forged letter. Cain's hand, she whispered, and someone inside your walls helping place it. Alistair's face went carved and lethal. I know. The wind shifted, carrying smoke from somewhere south. Another granary. Pressure was no longer mounting, it was breaking. By the time they returned to keep, night had fallen hard. The castle was awake with alarm. Runners in corridors, healers boiling herbs, scouts shouting updates over each other in the yard. Alistair's council demanded immediate quarantine and mass silvering of all suspect vectors, which in plain speech meant Anastasia in chains and half the border villages under guard. He dismissed them for 1 hour and locked himself in his private solar with Anastasia. Sarah posted outside the door. Inside, the room was unexpectedly warm. Bookshelves, old maps, a single narrow balcony open to moonlight. No iron. Rowan lintels, carved by hand. He had changed this room too. Anastasia stood at the balcony rail, breathing cold night, trying to hold herself together while images looped. Dead sentries, black grain, her own forged signature, Kane's laugh. "I should leave," she said without turning. "If I'm out of the keep, your elders lose their excuse." "Not happening. You can't protect me from your whole kingdom." He came to stand beside her, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers. "Watch me." She laughed once, brittle. "That confidence is either attractive or infuriating. I haven't decided." "Both can be true." The answer startled a real small smile out of her. It faded quickly. She stared at the moon snagged in pine branches. "When I was 13, Kane told me blood makes you safe. Family before all," he said. "Then he used my blood to write my death into silver." Her voice shook despite herself. "I don't know how to trust a bond I didn't choose. I don't know how to trust anything that says forever." Alistair was quiet for a long moment. "I was mated once," he said at last, so low she almost missed it. She turned sharply. "What?" 2 centuries ago. Political alliance. She wanted the throne, not me. Tried to sell battle routes to my uncle during the rebellion." His mouth tightened. "I executed my uncle. Exiled her. After that, I shut the door and called it wisdom." Anastasia searched his face, seeing old scars she hadn't known to look for. "So why open it now?" He met her gaze fully. No king mask, no court steel. "Because when you screamed in that ravine, every instinct in me said tear the world apart. And when you looked at me after, terrified and furious and still fighting, I wanted not to own you, to deserve you." The words struck deeper than any oath. Her throat worked. "I don't know if I can give what the bond wants." "Then give what you can." He lifted a hand, stopped just short of her cheek. "May I?" She nodded. His fingers touched her face with a gentleness that undid her more than violence ever had. She leaned into it before she could stop herself, eyes closing briefly. The bond lit warm from sternum to skin, aching and steady. He bent, slow enough to refuse pressure, and rested his forehead to hers. No kiss. Just breath shared in moonlight. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like danger. A fist slammed the door. "My king!" Sarah's voice tight with urgency. Breach in the lower west passage. 3 dead guards. Assassins inside. The moment shattered. Alistair was moving before Sarah finished. Anastasia grabbed the ceremonial dagger from his desk on instinct and followed him into the corridor. Chaos had teeth. The lower west passage was a knot of steel, blood, and torch smoke. 2 attackers in Thornwood livery were already down, throats cut by their own comrades to prevent questioning. A third vaulted a banister, mask slipping to reveal Ashfang's scar bands burned along his jaw. "Varric's men!" Sarah shouted, engaging another near the stairs. Alistair shifted mid-stride, half-wolf speed turning him into a blur. He hit one rogue so hard both crashed through a side table. Anastasia ducked a wild slash, drove her borrowed blade up under an attacker's ribs, and twisted free before he dropped. She'd forgotten how loud combat was indoors. The ring of metal on stone, the wet coughs, the snarls not quite human. A 4th assassin appeared above on the gallery, crossbow already raised. Not at guards, not at her. At Alistair. "Down!" Anastasia screamed. She threw herself into him. The bolt whistled past where his throat had been and buried in the wall. He spun, shielding her behind his body as a second bolt fired and grazed his shoulder. Too shallow for a kill shot, deep enough for venom. She smelled it an instant later, crushed moonbane and winter aconite, bitter and metallic. Wolf suppressant. Slow paralysis. Alistair staggered one step. No. He ripped the bolt free with a snarl and kept fighting, but his left arm lagged. Sarah's blade took the gallery shooter in the knee. A guard finished him. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. 4 rogues dead, 1 dying, 3 Thornwood guards bleeding out on the flags. Anastasia dropped to her knees beside the last living assassin and yanked his mask off. Young, scarred, terrified, and defiant both. "Who sent you?" she demanded, dagger at his throat. He grinned blood through broken teeth. "Your king dies by winter bell." She pressed harder. "Kane?" His grin widened. "Ask his coinman." His hand spasmed toward his vest. Anastasia caught the motion, ripped open the leather seam, and pulled free a waxed packet bound in red thread. Blood-sealed. Kane's signet stamped deep. The assassin laughed once, coughed, and went still. Anastasia broke the seal with shaking fingers and read by torchlight while Alistair leaned against the wall, breath roughening as venom worked. "If Thornwood lives past Moot, burn the grain and cut the throat that shares my blood. Her death must be seen in their hall. Panic crowns me before spring." Signed in Kane's hand. Alistair's knees hit stone. "Alistair!" Anastasia caught him before his head struck. His skin was cold already, pupils too wide, jaw clenched against involuntary tremors. Sarah dropped beside them, swearing. "Moonbane, we need healer's purge now." Boots thundered. Elders flooded the corridor, Marrow at front, and stopped dead at the tableau, their king collapsing in Anastasia's arms, bodies everywhere, Kane's letter in her bloody hand. Marrow pointed, voice ringing with fear sharpened into accusation. "Seize her." Guards hesitated. Anastasia looked up slowly, wolf rising behind her eyes. "Touch me," she said, holding the blood-sealed proof high, "and you bury the only witness who can keep him alive." Alistair convulsed once against her grip, breath hitching. Outside, somewhere beyond the walls, warning horns began to howl. One long blast, then another, then a third. Granaries under attack again. Critical had arrived. Critical had arrived. And it was wearing her face. "Seize her," Marrow repeated, louder, as horns wailed beyond the walls and Alistair's body shook in Anastasia's arms. No one moved at first. Sarah's blade was still wet. The surviving guards looked between their elder and their king, caught in the thin place where law and panic tore apart. Anastasia lifted Kane's blood-sealed letter until even the farthest guard could see the signet pressed into wax. "Read it," she snapped at Marrow, out loud. "If you still want me in irons after, do it yourself." Marrow's nostrils flared. "You expect us to trust ink," she cut in, "or trust the man convulsing on your floor because hired rogues put moonbane in his blood." Alistair's head lolled against her shoulder. His breath came shallow, each inhale catching. Dark veins spidered from the bolt wound along his collarbone. Tamsin shoved through the crowd of elders, white eyes hard as river ice. "Move!" Marrow bristled. "Seer, stand down." "Move," she said again, and something in her old voice made even Brant step aside. Tamsin dropped to her knees opposite Anastasia, fingers hovering over Alistair's wound without touching. "Poison's already in his heartline." She looked up at Sarah. "Healer's chamber. Now." Sarah barked orders. 2 guards rushed forward with a cloak stretcher. Marrow blocked their path with his staff. "If she goes with him and he dies, we lose all witness. She is suspect." Anastasia's wolf surged hot and violent. She rose in one fluid motion, still half supporting Alistair, and put Kane's letter flat against Marrow's chest. "You want witness?" she hissed. I am the one your enemy wants dead in public. If I vanish into a cell tonight, Cain wins before dawn. She turned her head. Sarah. The commander met her eyes. Say it. Lock every gate. No Elder's private guard enters Healer's wing. Pull Tamsin's neutral seers to stand witness at the door, and send riders to the treaty hall. Both packs, neutral tribunal, first bell. Public hearing. Brant made a strangled sound. You have no authority to call moot. A rough, poisoned voice answered from her shoulder. She does. Now. Alistair's eyes were slitted open, gold flickering through pain. He forced the words out like broken glass. My command. Open tribunal, at first bell. Then his body folded again. That ended the argument. Sarah slammed her fist to her chest. By the crown. They ran. The healer's chamber was all heat, blood, and shouted instructions. Bundles of rosemary and bitterroot swung from rafters. Copper basins hissed as hot stones dropped in. Alistair lay shirtless on the central table, skin ash pale beneath old battle scars, breath stuttering while two healers tried to keep his heartline from collapsing. Moonbanes braided with aconite, one healer said, hands shaking. Standard purge won't hold. Then don't do standard, Anastasia said. The healer glared. You are not. Tamsin, Anastasia said, cutting through him. The old seer stepped close, scenting the air around Alistair and Anastasia both. Mate bonds active but unsealed, she murmured. It can carry vitality if bridged right. Dangerous. Dangerous if we do nothing too, Anastasia said. Tell me what. Tamsin held her gaze for one long beat, then nodded toward a silver bowl. Blood and breath. You'll anchor his wolf while we strip poison. If he slips, you pull him back. If you panic, he dies. No pressure. Anastasia sliced her palm with a healer's lancet before anyone could object. Blood welled dark and hot. Tamsin mixed it with ground wintergreen and ash root, chanting under her breath as she painted a circle around Alistair's wound. Hands on him, Tamsin ordered. Anastasia pressed one bloody hand over Alistair's heart, the other at his jaw. Alistair, she said, leaning close. Stay. His lashes fluttered. No response. Again, Tamsin said sharply, beginning the purge chant. Healers poured steaming moon water over the wound. Alistair arched with a sound ripped from somewhere deep and feral. Anastasia held him down. Stay with me. You don't get to bleed out and leave me with your counsel. His lips twitched despite the poison. Barely. The room blurred at the edges as the bond flared. She felt him then. Not thoughts, not words, but the shape of him under pain. Cold mountain, iron will, wolf snapping at the dark. Poison dragged him down like chains through deep water. She bared her teeth and pulled. Mine, she growled under her breath, startling herself with the word, not for death. His heartbeat stuttered, then hit hard against her palm. Tamsin exhaled. Again. They worked until moonset. When at last the black seep at the wound turned clear, Alistair went limp in healing sleep instead of poison crash. The room sagged with exhausted relief. Sarah appeared in the doorway, face smeared with soot and rain. Outer attacks repelled, 2 granaries lost, 1 saved. We took a live rogue scout. He confirmed Ashfang contract under Ironhold payment. Her gaze dropped to Alistair, then lifted to Anastasia. Riders returned. Cain accepted tribunal. Of course he did, Anastasia said, voice hoarse. He thinks he can still own the room. Tamsin washed blood from her hands and stared at Anastasia's cut palm. Then don't let him. By dawn, storm clouds had swallowed the sky. Alistair woke as they armed for the tribunal, pale but standing, shoulder-bandaged black, where poison had bitten deep. He watched Anastasia strap Alistair's ceremonial dagger to her thigh and frowned. You should be in the mountain den, he said, Until this is done. She tied the last buckle and met his eyes in the mirror. No. Anastasia. No. She turned fully toward him. If I hide, Kane writes the ending. He spent years turning me into rumor. The only thing that kills rumor is witnessed truth. His jaw tightened. He will try to kill you in that hall. He already has. Repeatedly. Sarah entered carrying a carved box wrapped in old blackwood tartan. Found in Kane's seized campaign chest, she said, handing it to Anastasia. Hidden compartment. Anastasia opened it. Inside lay her mother's heirloom sigil set, black enamel wolf crest, moonstone throat clasp, and the narrow silver and obsidian braid rings worn by Blackwood line heirs at blood-right trials. Kane had told her they were destroyed after her father's death. Her hands shook as she lifted them. Alistair stepped forward. "May I?" She nodded. He fastened the moonstone clasp at her throat, fingers brushing the burn scars there. Then he set the crest over her heart. "Whatever happens in that hall," he said quietly, "you are not alone." She held his gaze. "Then hold your wolves. Let me speak before they tear him apart." A flicker of grim approval crossed his face. Done. When they rode for the treaty hall, thunder rolled over the pines like distant war drums. The winter moot hall stood at the old border where both territories met. A long stone chamber built around the original treaty stones, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of blood oaths. Today it was packed shoulder to shoulder, thornwood on one side, blackwood on the other. Neutral seers in gray at center. Kane Ironhold stood at the far dais in regent black, immaculate, as if he hadn't spent the night trying to murder a king. His smile when he saw Anastasia was slow and poisonous. "Niece," he called, "you look well for a dead girl." Anastasia walked straight down the central aisle, heirloom sigils glinting under torchlight. Murmurs swelled and broke as wolves recognized Blackwood line symbols Kane had claimed lost. She stopped at the circle carved before the treaty stones and spoke so every corner could hear. "By ancestral right of Blackwood first blood," she said, voice clear as steel. "I invoke trial by voice and fang. Let the accused and accuser answer before kin, crown, and neutral seers." Shock flashed through the room. Kane's smile twitched. Marrow, seated among Thornwood elders, half rose. "That right is obsolete." Tamsin struck her staff once. "Not repealed." Kane spread his hands, gracious predator. "Very well. Speak your grievance." Anastasia looked at him for a long heartbeat, then said the words the seed of her rage had waited years to deliver. "I call you as kin first," she said. "Kane Ironhold, brother to my mother, did you blood-bind execution magic into my cuffs and send me across the border to die?" A hush fell so complete the torchfire sounded loud. Kane tilted his head. "I sent a dangerous liability where she could do least harm. So yes, so necessary." Snarls rose from both sides. Alistair's command rolled over them like thunder. "Hold." Anastasia drew Kane's letter and handed it to Tamsin, then to the nearest neutral seer. "Read." The seer broke wax, scanned, and went pale. His voice shook as he recited the lines naming Varric, the assassination order, and Anastasia's required public death. Uproar exploded. Blackwood wolves shouted denial. Thornwood howled for blood. Alistair stepped between factions, half-shifted, fangs bared, keeping bodies apart by pure alpha force. Kane laughed over the noise. "A forged letter proves nothing." "Then let stone prove it," Anastasia said. She unsheathed Alistair's ceremonial dagger. Its black rowan hilt gleamed with old runes. She sliced her palm and pressed bleeding hand to the central treaty stone. The granite drank. Runes lit under her blood like embers catching wind. A low hum rolled through the hall, vibrating in rib cages and teeth. Mist bled up from the floor around the stones, and with it came scent memory, ancient magic recording what had been spoken at the original blood treaty, not voices first. Smell, clean wheat, pine resin, oath blood, pack bond. Then a newer layer, oily and wrong, slithered across it. Clove wax, blight rot, Cain's iron bitter blood mark threaded into forged addendums. The neutral seers staggered as the memory hit full force. Tamsin spoke into the stunned silence. Forgery confirmed. Original treaty contains no living tribute clause. Insertions carry Cain Ironhold's blood signature. Another seer lifted one of the captured totems wrapped in cloth. Blight hex carvings match same blood signature. A third, face gray, held up a second packet from Sarah's evidence satchel. Assassination orders to Ashfang, same mark. The room turned. Not gradually, instantly. A pack turning from one scent as one body. Cain's composure cracked. "You fools," he spat. "Without me, you would still be bleeding each other for scraps." Anastasia stepped closer. "You made the scraps." His wolf surfaced in his eyes, feral and cornered. "I made power," he snarled. "I made fear useful." Then he moved. He shifted mid-lunge, bones snapping loud in the hall, fur ripping through leather as he launched for Anastasia's throat. Gasps and screams split the chamber. Alistair surged forward, blocked by 3 panicked wolves colliding in front of him. Anastasia didn't retreat. She pivoted on her back foot just as Cain's weight hit the space she had occupied. His shoulder slammed the dais edge. For one clean opening she saw it, the blight totem hanging under his throat cord, hidden beneath regent mantle. She drove Alistair's dagger straight through it. Wood shattered. Iron nails burst. Hex smoke erupted in a black-green plume that blasted outward and filled the hall with raw, scent truth. Cain's blood on rot fields, Cain's hand on forged wax, Cain's touch on moonbane bolts, Cain's rage when she crossed alive. Wolves gagged, recoiling from the stench of his crimes. Cain thrashed, half-shifted and bleeding, trying to rip the dagger free. Anastasia held on, teeth bared. He stared at her with pure hate. "I made you useful, girl. Without me, you were nothing but a weak blood burden." Anastasia's voice carried steady to every stone. "You sold your blood for a throne. I chose mine and made a kingdom." Cain lunged again. This time, Alistair reached them, shoving wolves aside, and slammed Cain to the floor with a roar that shook dust from rafters. Guards piled in, shackling limbs with chain-wrapped rowan. Cain still snapped and cursed as seers closed circle. Tamsin lifted her staff. "By witness of neutral sight, Cain Ironhold is guilty of blood forgery, famine hexing, oath breach, and kingslay attempt." No one argued. Alistair, chest heaving, turned to Anastasia before the whole hall and knelt. "Not in weakness, in law." "Anastasia Blackwood," he said, voice ringing, "as wronged blood and surviving target, I offer you execution right." The hall held its breath. She looked down at Cain. Uncle, teacher, betrayer, architect of years of death. He glared up at her, still convinced fear would save him. "It should have been me on that border stone," he hissed. "You were always too soft to finish anything." Anastasia felt her wolf rise, not wild now, but cold and certain. "I accept," she said. They dragged Cain to the tribunal circle, chain removed. No silver. He had used enough of that on others. Just witness and law. Anastasia stepped back, stripped off cloak and boots, and shifted. It came fast and clean, bone stretching, skin rippling, midnight dark wolf breaking through with moonstone eyes. Gasps skittered through the crowd at her size, at the scar of silver burn visible even in fur at her throat. Cain shifted too, ragged and furious, then charged. 1 beat. 2. She sidestepped at the last instant, let his momentum carry past, and took his throat from the side in one precise, crushing strike. He dropped before the echo died. Silence swallowed the hall. Anastasia released and stepped back, blood bright on her muzzle, chest heaving. When she shifted back, naked and shaking, Alistair wrapped his cloak around her shoulders without breaking eye contact. No one called her cursed. Night found them at the moon altar high above Thornwood Keep, where the stone opened to sky and stars burned hard through clearing storm. They were both still trembling. Battle crash, grief, relief, all of it. Alistair set a lantern between them and removed his crown braid ring, placing it on the altar stone. "No court," he said. "No witnesses unless you ask for them." Anastasia stood in borrowed linen, hair loose, Cain's blood long washed away, but not forgotten. "I want this to be ours." He nodded once. Then, formal as Oathfire, he said, "Anastasia Blackwood, will you bind with me as equal?" Her throat tightened. Every chain memory in her body waited for command. None came. Only his question. Open hand. Choice. "Yes," she whispered. Then stronger. "Yes, as equal." His eyes flashed gold with something fierce and reverent. He stepped close, slow enough for refusal, and touched her cheek with his knuckles. "Tell me if I hurt you." "I will." He bent to the juncture of her neck and shoulder, breath hot against skin scarred by silver, and paused there, mouth barely touching. The anticipation was almost worse than pain, her pulse hammering under his lips, wolf pacing in bright hunger. "Mine?" he murmured, rough. She slid her hands into his hair, pulled him closer, and answered, "Yours, if you are mine. Always." Then his teeth pierced. Pain flared white and immediate, sharp enough to arch her back and tear a cry from her throat. His grip on her waist tightened, steadying, never forcing. Heat flooded the bite almost at once, winter light pouring into wound, power and protection and raw devotion threading through nerve endings where agony had struck. The pain transformed as it spread, melting into a deep, trembling pleasure that radiated down spine and into her belly. Her wolf threw back its head and howled inside her. She felt him through the bond with terrifying clarity. His restraint, his need, the centuries of cold he had wrapped around himself, cracking open to make room for her. Not ownership. Vow. He released with a shuddering breath and pressed his forehead to hers, blood bright on his mouth. "Mate," he whispered. Anastasia was shaking too hard to speak for a heartbeat. Then she took his wrist. "Your turn," she said, voice unsteady and fierce. "Mine." She lifted his arm, found the pulse point where heartbeat leapt against skin, and looked up once for consent. He nodded, eyes blazing. "Yours," he said. She bit down. His sound was low and wrecked, half growl, half prayer. His blood hit her tongue, hot iron and pine and storm. Power surged up her jaw into her chest, and when she released, the bond slammed shut between them like two halves of a circuit locking. It was not gentle. It was tidal. Heartbeats snapping into sync. Scents twining beyond separation. Wolves harmonizing in a single bright chord that rang through marrow and moonlight and the very stones under their feet. Anastasia gasped as sensation rushed her, his strength at her back, her fire under his skin, shared instinct, shared ache, shared home. The old command buried in bloodline runes, die beyond your border, burned, cracked, and went dark under the force of the new bond. Alistair swore softly as if he felt it break too. They clung to each other, foreheads pressed, breaths ragged, hands mapping shoulders and spine as if relearning where one ended and the other began. He kissed her temple, voice unsteady with wonder. "I'm here." She smiled wetly, exhausted and incandescent. "So am I." After a while, when shaking turned to warm heaviness, he traced the mark at her neck with reverent fingertips. She touched the bite at his wrist, then interlaced their hands over the altar. He looked at her like dawn after a long winter. Not cursed, crowned. Her laugh broke into a sob and back again. Not cold. Home. They stayed there until the moon tipped west, wrapped around each other under a sky finally clear. The next morning, open council convened in the same hall where Cain had died. This time, the treaty stones were scrubbed clean and ringed with both pack banners side by side. No chains, no collars, no tribute carts waiting outside. Alistair stood at the central dais, mark visible at his wrist, Anastasia at his right with her own mark dark at neck and shoulder. Murmurs rippled through both delegations when they saw. Tamsin struck her staff to begin. First matter, Alistair said. Blood treaty revision. A neutral scribe unrolled fresh parchment. Anastasia stepped forward and read each clause aloud before signing. No living tribute under any pretext. Shared Border Patrol Command under joint captains. Open grain ledgers and seasonal audit by neutral seers. Mutual aid in blight response. Brant muttered from the elder bench. Expensive mercy. Anastasia turned to him. Cheaper than war and famine funerals. Marrow, gaunt after a sleepless night and public disgrace, rose slowly. I moved to chain her, he said into the chamber, voice rough. I was wrong. It cost him to say it. She saw that, and nodded once. Sarah stepped into the aisle in formal war-claw black. Ashfang leader Varric was taken at dawn in the South Pass trying to cross with Ironhold coin and forged Thornwood insignia. He lives to testify before neutral tribunal. One thread tied off. Second matter, Tamsin said. Succession and liaison authority. Blackwood's surviving council had sent representatives by noon, shaken, chastened wolves, led by an older she-wolf named Mira Vale, who knelt before Anastasia and offered the Blackwood line ring Cain had stolen years ago. By vote of remaining council, Mira said, we recognize Anastasia Blackwood as rightful line heir and appoint her interpack voice until our own alpha selection is lawfully settled. Anastasia took the ring and slid it onto her finger. Alistair lifted a circlet of blackened rowan inlaid with moonstone. By Thornwood crown and witness treaty, he said, I name Anastasia Blackwood Moon Queen of Thornwood and Blackwood Liaison, vested with co-equal authority over interpack law, exile petitions, and blood right protections. He placed the circlet on her head. Not a possession, a station. The hall bowed. Later that day, she stood in the old east courtyard where iron cages had once held unruly she-wolves for transfer. Those cages were gone, melted down. In their place, carpenters raised rowan-framed cottages around a communal fire pit. The first arrivals came at dusk. 2 sisters from a river pack, an older widow cast out after refusing tribute remarriage, and a teenage wolf with healing scars at her throat. They stepped through the gate wary and braced for cruelty. Anastasia met them herself. No callers here, she said, opening the ledger. Names first, then food, then sleep. The youngest stared at the mark on Anastasia's neck. Are you really queen? Anastasia glanced toward the keep balcony where Alistair leaned watching, his expression softening when she looked up. Yes, she said. And this place answers to me. Spring came lean, but alive. At the spring moot, united banners snapped in clean wind over the treaty field where she had once bled in chains. Now stalls of Blackwood grain stood beside Thornwood smoked meat. Children from both packs chased each other between tents while patrol captains compared maps instead of wounds. Syrah, newly named High Commander of the Joint Border Watch, argued cheerfully with Mira over scout rotations. Tamsin presided over a seer bench that now required triple verification for any blood accusation case. Marrow served restitution terms supervising granary rebuilds. Brant, stripped of elder seat, hauled stones in silence and did not complain twice. At sunset, Alistair found Anastasia at the treaty stones. They stood shoulder to shoulder, marked, mated, crowned. He slid an arm around her waist. Look, he murmured. Across the field, Blackwood and Thornwood pups sat in a mixed circle while an old veteran from each pack taught them the same knotwork for boundary ropes. No one told them to hate each other. Anastasia leaned into him, hand covering his marked wrist. The bond between them settled deep and steady, no longer lightning strike but hearth fire, constant, living, theirs. Think they'll keep this peace? She asked. He kissed her temple. With us to guard it? Yes. She smiled, fierce and bright. Then we'll give them more to guard. His brows lifted. More. She took his hand and placed it, deliberate, over her lower belly. Not a promise yet, but a direction. His breath caught. Then he laughed, quiet, astonished, joyful, and pressed his forehead to hers. Still ours, he whispered. Always ours, she whispered back. Behind them, the united banners rose and fell in the spring wind like lungs learning one breath.